Welcome to Excluded and Yet Entangled in Two Dictatorships, the political constructivist Oskar Nerlinger. Please submit your questions to the Q&A section. This is an event of our monthly series Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression, which is generously sponsored by Allianz Partners. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized and Banned Art based in New York. We research, discuss, publish and exhibit artists whose lives and work were affected by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. Today, we hear about the avant-garde artist Oskar Nerlinger, who lived through extreme societal and political changes, including two dictatorships, which very much influenced the form and content of his art. In 1931, he stated, "We cannot pour new content into old forms, while seeking to develop new means of expression for new social, economic, and political content. So in this way, we will create a new art and cooperate in building the future." I'm excited to introduce Eckhard Gillen, who is an independent curator based in Berlin. He has organized numerous exhibitions and published widely on Russian, American, and German art of the 20th century. Among his exhibition catalogs and books are America, Traum und Depression 1920-1940, Akademie der Künste, Berlin 1980, German Art from Beckmann to Richter, Images of a Divided Country, Yale University Press 1997. In collaboration with Stephanie Barron, he curated Art of Two Germanys, Cold War Cultures 1945 to 1989, which was on view at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Germanisches Nationalmuseum Nürnberg, Deutsches Historisches Museum Berlin 2009. Then Feindliche Brüder, Der Kalte Krieg und die Deutsche Kunst 1945 to 1989 in Berlin 2009. Art in Europe 1945 to 68, Facing the Future, Beaux-Arts, Brussels, ZKM Karlsruhe, Pushkin Museum Moscow 2016 and 17. Flashes of the Future, The Art of the 68ers, Ludwig Forum Aachen 2018. And Constructing the World, Art and Economy 1919 to 1939 in the United States, Soviet Union and Germany at Kunsthalle Mannheim 2018-19. The list is much longer, but those are the most relevant books for this talk. Since 2011, Eckhard is adjunct professor for art history at the Film University in Potsdam-Babelsberg. Welcome, Eckhard.
Thank you, Rachel. After visiting the School of Applied Arts in Strasbourg, Oskar Nerlinger studied at the Art School of the Decorative Arts Museum in Berlin under Professor Emil Orlik together with George Goss. There he met Alice Pfeffer, whom he married in 1918. She worked as artist under the name Alice Lex Nerlinger. From 1915 to 1918, Oskar Nerlinger served as a soldier but was not deployed to the front because of a lung disease. Instead, he did garrison service in Strasbourg, where he graduated as a high school drawing teacher. And in 1919, the couple moved to Berlin, where they stayed until the end of their lives. Nerlinger worked as a drawing teacher in various Berlin high schools. He started his artistic career at Herbert Walden's gallery and magazine Der Sturm in Berlin, where he participated for the first time in 1921 at the 114th exhibition of Herbert Walden. Nerlinger discovered the Russian constructivism at the first Russian art show in the Gallery van Diemen in October 1922, which certainly played a key role for his growing interest in constructivism. He was especially impressed by the Soviet constructivist Elisitsky, Gustav Glutzis, Rodchenko, and Vladimir Tatlin. See here Glutzis' Dynamic City and Elisitsky, the Lenin Tribune from 1920. Participating at the Sturm exhibition in 1922, he met the Hungarian constructivist Moholy-Nagy and Laszlo Perry. See here Laszlo Perry's wall design at the Große Berliner Kunstausstellung in 1923. Like these constructivists, Oskar Nerlinger rejected painterly and illusionistic means and called for the development of constructive objective paintings. Artistic production should now be aligned with industrial production, economical, exact, appropriate, functional, rationally justifiable. Aesthetics should argue collectively, universally, in a generally understandable way. The design process should be standardized and implemented with technical means, less individually by hand. Instead of brush and palette, he now used ruler, compasses, the spray can, technical media like photography, photogram, and film. Art became design. The picture was transformed into a construction. The new type of artistic engineer, the designer, emerged. This constructivism freed Nerlinger from randomness. He says it is not longer about expression of an internal or external experience, but about the design of the pure color form without conscious thought or emotional content, the visualization of the energy inherent in the material. That he writes in 1926. The composition Black Curve from 1924 is an example for a more non-objective constructivism, a synthesis of new objectivity and rational construction. The base of the arch hooks into the depths of the room at a right angle and touches a red circular shape, half of which overlays a light blue rectangle. This combination of a red circle and a blue rectangle appears again in the photomontage's 8 car pictures, as you can see here in 1927. I give you some examples. So in the background, I have Chicago, or no, they have Manhattan, and also for the 8 sports pictures. You see the red and the blue rectangle, and here the same, some examples. Nerlinger uses the same methods of photomontage and dynamic perspectives as Gustav Klutzis, as you can see here, which he did 1 year later in 1928 in his postcard series, Physical Culture and Sport for the All-Union Spartakiata, an athletic meet in Moscow in 1928. So Nerlinger was 1927, this is 1928. Nerlinger takes up the idea of his composition, Black Curve, also for his poster design for Lysa shows. Lysa was a firm for show fabrication. The free autonomous composition becomes the model design for advertising. The show as a reality quote is pressed by the tip and the arch like in a vise and appears to be impaled. Nerlinger is using the composition Black Curve again for his painting Radio Tower and Elevated Railway in 1929. He developed the abstract constructivist design into a representational constructivism now, from the abstract to the representational. He was inspired by the daily outlook from his apartment in the Dernburgstraße near the Argus, which means Autoversuchsstrecke, car test track, at the elevated train station Witzleben near the Berlin Radio Tower. The strong soffit from which the radio tower is seen gives him a dynamic perspective as a symbol of the modern mass communication. The 138-meter high tower for electromagnetic waves was erected between 1924 and 1926. And in 1923 was the date of the first public broadcast from the radio station Foxhaus in Berlin. Nerlinger's intention was to discover the dynamics and aesthetics of the big city and traffic. At the same time, the Hungarian constructivist and photographer Laszlo Moholy-Nagy photographed the Berlin Radio Tower in the other direction, from top to down, and showed the lineament of the parasols and tables as an ornament of the new leisure society. Nerlinger saw the city as an organism of life, the operation of the road the streetcars, the cars, the cyclists, pedestrians, not as details, but as a whole movement. The painting, The Early Train, shows a working city in Berlin around the radio tower as a dynamic organism. Nerlinger developed in these years an optimistic, dynamic image of Berlin, the metropolis of the 1920s in Germany after November Revolution, Kapp Putsch, and hyperinflation, which impoverished the middle class. With the introduction of the Rentenmark on November 15 in 1923, with which the inflation was brought to an end, began a phase of relative stabilization until the global economic crisis of 1929. The dollar sun now rose over Germany, gave the country a certain prosperity, which led to a liberalization of social life, above all in the German capital, Berlin. With this turnabout in German politics, the spirit of objectivity and a dynamic constructivism was meant to heal a German society torn apart by class struggles. The Dawes Plan nurtured hopes of a white socialism, Henry Ford, which was to provide a solution to the social question without calling capitalist modes of production based on a harmony of capital and work into question. In 1926, Oskar Nerlinger became the co-founder of the artist group The Abstracts, Die Abstrakten, and in 1927, chairperson of the Berlin local group. This group presented every year at the Great Berlin Art Exhibition. And in opposition to the Hanover and Dresden group, Berlin pulled away from the pure abstraction positions and moved politically to the left. You can see here the working day in 1929. But Nerlinger's painting Der Weltferne, The Distant Artist from 1930, shows the intensification of his previous cool, objective, constructive metropolitan painting on political commitment. The painter stands under a huge glass hood and paints a still life, which is carefully arranged on a white cloth over a table. The scene hovers high above an expressway that crosses railway lines. We see a tank following a workers' demonstration with banners and red flags, who have conquered one of the lanes, while the traffic flows continue next to and in front of them. This glass ivory tower stands for bourgeois self-sufficiency and still life for the art la pour la attitude, for the look inwards and the ignorance of society. In contrast to the hermetically sealed bourgeois studio world, he depicts a demonstrating crowd into the picture that possibly refers to the 1st of May in 1929, when the Berlin police, President Sergey, broke up the May demonstration, killing 22 protesters and seriously injuring over 100. This event certainly contributed to politicization of the group, the Abstracts, who consequently changed their name to the Timely Ones in 1932. In a series of paintings beginning in 1930, the composition Black Curve returns in Nerlinger's paintings, like here in Get to Work. Now he is showing the workers like robots marching over the factory bridge in front of the huge chimneys. This scene remembers the scene in the lower town of the workers in Fritz Lang's movie Metropolis, done in 1925-26. You see here two examples, these workers here, and here's another one where they end now in this demonized machine. In the center of the paintings, work streets here and elevated trains, both in 1930. A clock is at the vanishing point of all roads and tracks, determining the rhythm of the daily life of the workers who move mechanically like ants. The photo montage, Quickly One More Bite, from 1928, shows the effect of the rationalized workplace on the human being. The stress that the worker, you see a photograph done by Alice of her husband as a worker, is subject to the clock's time regime. is demonstrated by a red line between the ear and the clock. We can see how the worker pays close attention to the bell, which will signal the return to work as he anxiously chews his sandwich. Nerlinger demonstrates how the worker is subjected to the rhythm of the machine and turned into a machine man. 1 year before, John Hartfield demonstrates how rationalization is on the march in 1927. The stopwatch and the entry sheet for time and labor costs is becoming part of a human-like figure. The figure holds the front page of the leading newspaper of the Social Democratic Party, Vorwärts, Progress, which critical intents in the right hand. The Communist Party regarded the Social Democrats as social fascists. For Nerlinger, this kind of progress ends with a rope. So it's called here The Last Resort, 1931. It chooses a double perspective from bottom to top of the ceiling of the room in which the man has hanged himself, and at the same time, the view from the side of the hanged man from above through the window straight down onto the street, where the traffic with trams and is unaffected with cars, passes by, and a wheelbarrow going by. In the Soviet Union, such a pessimistic view of living conditions was unthinkable for an artist. It was only allowed in view of the conditions in Western capitalism. So here we see a rare exception, the painting The Balloon Flies Away by Sergey Lushishkin. The viewer's gaze goes between tenement houses and ends abruptly at the wooden fence. In front of it, 6 bare trees are planted in a row. A child in a blue dress stands lost between the houses and watches his vanishing red balloon. The viewer looks from an elevated point of view down at the passage between the houses with the child, and at the same time looks from the bottom up at the facades of the rental houses. His gaze meets a man who has hanged himself and a mother with her baby on her breast, visible through the 5th and 4th floor windows of the building on the right. The changing viewpoints create an eerie atmosphere and makes a house look unstable. According to the artist, childhood memories of unfilled dreams were the trigger for the picture. And in the Soviet Union around 1926, there was a wave of suicides among young people who were beginning to doubt the ideals of socialism. Oskar Nerlinger was in the years 1930-32 one of the most important artists of the committed art scene in Weimar Republic. He became, at the same time as his wife Alice Lex Nerlinger, a member of the Association of Proletarian Revolutionary Art, which was founded in 1928 and belonged to the Communist Party of Germany. This group, the ASSO, cooperated with the progressive Soviet avant-garde artist group Oktober. In spite of the fact that the Berlin local group of the ASSO was stylistically heterogeneous, it represented both a proletarian realism and principles of constructivism and the montage. At that time, there was no conflict between the positions of aesthetic modernism and the communist politics. As their Soviet comrades, the group of the timely ones around Nerlinger, Alice Lex Nerlinger and Paul Fuhrmann, did not want to lead the class struggle with the traditional means of naturalistic reflection in Germany, as the group AHA in Moscow. Nerlinger reclaimed in the renowned German art magazine Das Kunstblatt, quote, "We cannot pour new content into old forms. We are seeking to develop new means of expression for new social, economic, and political content. So in this way, we will create a new art and cooperate in building the future." Members of the artist group Oktober, like the painter Alexander Denikan, and on the other side, Sergey Eisenstein, Zigavertov for film, Elisitsky, Rodchenko for design and photography, intended the activation of the viewer and the overcoming of his passive attitude of reception. At the same time, Denikan kept, like Nerlinger, to the elements of easel painting, but he rejected the picturesque and illusionistic means and demanded the development of a constructive painting. You can see an example for that. Here it's just, you can see this example here by Alexander Denikas building new factories in 1926. It emphasizes the dynamic process of industrialization which was being pursued with revolutionary vigor in the Soviet Union. The unfinished steel framework, which you can see here of the factory, still under construction, has the appearance of a construction drawing on white paper. The viewer participates in the process of constructing the new factory complex. In front of the filigree architecture, whose diagonal orientation points to an open future, the present and future of work under socialism stand face to face in the form of two female workers. With her back to the viewer, the older of the two pushes a trolley filled with coal, her muscular body, ravaged by the heavy work, visible through their dirty clothing. Opposite her, in an elevated position, stands a smiling young woman in an immaculate light blue dress. As if from the future, she looks triumphantly at her colleague from the present, who still has to carry out back-breaking manual work. The luminous figure of the blonde female worker already embodies the ideal image of the new man of the future, liberated from the burden of work. On the initiative of Nerlinger and his like-minded colleagues, the Berlin ASSO distanced itself around 1930 from the Soviet partner, the old-fashioned traditional ACHA, to which it subordinated a bourgeois conception of art reduced to traditional oil paintings. Instead, the Berlin branch of the ASSO invited the Soviet artist group Oktober, which was also founded in 1928, and competed with the ACHA to show at a large exhibition in Berlin in October 1930 that revolutionary constructivist art in the Soviet Union has more to offer than genre-like oil paintings. An analogy to the efforts of the abstract and contemporary group, the aim was to show the whole range of applied practical arts, such as architectural designs, typography, photography, photomontage, film, and posters. The opening of the exhibition was at the beginning of October 1930 under the title "At the Front of the Five-Year Plan" in the Berliner Münchstraße 24, which was closed on November 2nd, and traveled then to Krefeld, Düsseldorf, and Cologne. In the newspaper Rote Fahne, Alfred Durus wrote about the exhibition. For the artist, the workshop, the factory took place of the studio. In place of the old technical foundations, art has received the economic, political, technical, and psychological basis of the socialized business. This collaboration between the revolutionary artists in Germany and the Soviet Union, which has just begun, ended abruptly in 1931 when the group Oktober dissolved itself. And this self-dissolution of the group was followed by the decision in October 1932 to dissolve all previously independent artist groups and the ordinance of a central all-union artists association, which finally ended all debates about socialist art operating with the techniques of modern art. In 1934, socialist realism was propagated of the first Writers' Congress, and of course, the Stalinist-oriented KPD carried out the radical break with constructivism and all forms of modernity. While the Nazi ideologues were now propagating folk art under the control of the Reich Chamber of Culture, Maxim Gorky proclaimed socialist realism in his speech at the first All-Union Congress of Soviet Writers in 1934 in Moscow. Art now should serve the people, since the criteria of socialist realism that Gorky developed in his speech, the primacy of politics over art, partisan definition of truth, optimism, perspective, and loyalty to the people, are non-artistic. So the doctrine could later easily be transferred from literature to other media like visual arts, music, architecture, and film. Socialist realism is not a style, but a political, a partisan attitude to the artist, to reality. The artist is raised for his responsible task by the party, which is infallible in its collective wisdom. This change in Soviet art policy had, of course, serious consequences for left-wing artists in Germany, like Oskar Nerlinger. The reason for that caesura in the Soviet Union were internal contradictions of the forced industrialization, which were arbitrarily imposed by the planned economy, which resulted in extreme shortages, chaos, and famine. At the end of the first 5-year plan period in 33-34, Stalin saw himself forced to direct the attention of artists away from technology as a lever for change and back to the people as a decisive productive force. In the context of Stalin's proclamation of the new humanism, the socialist humanism, montage in art was frowned upon as cold technique, and the documentary character of photography was defamed as simply recording. Artists like Gustav Klutzis and Elisitsky, who used the photomontage, now use soft edge retouch brushes, a soft focus of brutal reality. The central structural element of the constructivist poster, the construction's disclosure, namely the hint of the painting's fabricated nature, was no longer desired. Instead, the division between the inner and outer was emphasized. Warmth and closeness were considered as metaphors for social well-being, while technology was considered as causing coldness and creating distance. This kind of new humanism is demonstrated in Denika's second painting on 2 coal mining women from 1947, which you can see here. Here too, 2 workers are at the center. In the background, you can see lorry pusher on a steel bridge underneath a smoking locomotive and workers carrying beams. In a grotesque contrast to the hustle and bustle and the smoke and soot of the production in the background, the 2 women are wearing white headscarves, white socks, and light yellow summer dresses, and stand alone in the industrial landscape. The one on the left takes on the role of the dark, hard worker in the picture from 1926, shoveling a little coal when building new workshops. The figure on the right embodies the idea of the future worker dressed in white. Here, however, she poses like an isolated monument figure, which, detached from any real reference, is only aimed at the potentially looking passerby. She rises above her workplace as a symbol of the beauty of work. Her strong physique, her self-confident demeanor are an expression of the Stalinistic ethics of purpose. Work makes you beautiful, happy, and proud. Here, the artist is no longer interested in encouraging the viewer to think about the temporary necessity of heavy physical labor and the process of industrialization as a prerequisite for future communism. Rather, work appears here as a timeless, natural state. The shoveling of coal becomes an allegory of work as it appears on countless reliefs and mosaics in the Moscow metro stations. Socialist realism, which has been generally binding since 1934, transfigures the present and anticipates the future, which will congeal into a static, timeless panorama of an imaginary reality. In Germany, the period of relative stabilization came to an end. They had 6 million people soon unemployed, another catastrophic economic crisis. National conservative, national socialists, and communist forces blamed the liberal Weimar system of the golden 20s for the economic debacle. One constant in all of Hitler's speeches was the identification of the extreme disintegration of form in the arts, parallel to the crisis in society. With this, he addressed a sentiment that was widespread among the bourgeoisie. The economic crisis fostered a longing for historical styles such as genre realism of the 19th century and classicism as maintainers of order. This tendency to re-establish the old and the tried in art did not result from Hitler's cultural policy, but was instead a product of the one and the same historical crisis that led to the victory of National Socialism as well. The avant-garde had left behind a hollow mental space, as Ernst Bloch said, that others knew how to fill with their ideology. Therefore, in 1933, almost at the same time as the Soviet Union, the Nazi system broke with all forms of modernity. In Germany, many painters of the new objectivity joined the new realism with its inclination towards classicism. Already in 1931, Werner Peiner's painting Fieldwork divides the landscape into an exact grid with meticulously painted lines of the field plots. Nature is symbolically subjected to the German sense of order as a timeless symbol of German nature and German landscape. Oskar Martin Amorbach left this grid and shows in his picture farmers working in the fields in 1944, people and animals in perfect harmony with nature. The field is flowing through the landscape like a river. This criticism of constructivism in particular, and its condemnation as a creation of misanthropic unconstructions, meant a double isolation for Oskar Nerlinger as a constructivist and communist. Both from the ruling Nazi regime and within the KPD, which remains a political home, which has now become illegal. The double spell against modernity, which was pronounced equally by the extreme left and the extreme right in the party spectrum of the Weimar Republic, must have hit him hard. As pre-executed in the Soviet Union, Nerlinger's experimental art was now also considered degenerate by the Nazi regime, even if he was not spared the painting ban. Despite the apartment search and the temporary arrest of Oskar Nerlinger in June 1933, he was able to continue working as a drawing teacher in Berlin until 1945. He became even a member of the Reichschamber of Fine Arts, whose local director for Berlin, Heinz Lederer, assured in a letter dated from October 1939 to the president of the Reichschamber, the painter Adolf Ziegler, quote, Nerlinger, who used to be very far left politically, was represented at the exhibition Degenerate Art. His free artistic creation today is oriented towards different points of view and from a cultural political point of view no longer objectionable. How far Nerlinger's artistic transformation corresponds to his real inner attitude, the reporting official is apparently not sure. Nerlinger went into so-called inner emigration, but behaved in a very contradictory manner and adapted his artistic language to the Nazi aesthetics. The twofold turning point in 1932 and 1933 left lasting traces in Oskar Nerlinger's art. In his artistic work, he withdrew entirely to works on paper with pencil, tempera, and watercolor. The big city, his central scene in the 1920s, disappeared from his pictures. Instead, as you can see here, he only depicted his native medieval Strasbourg at the covered bridge in Strasbourg, or a rural town like Havelberg in Winder. The dynamically ascending and descending road and railway bridges in his metropolitan pictures are straightened into a simple railway bridge, as you can see here, from 1939, which reveals a view of suburban landscape. The world is now seen through the hedge, through which one looks into an intact, untouched landscape with a church tower, horse-drawn vehicle, and fields in all shades of green. Like many inner emigrants, Nerlinger also sought refuge in nature. Typical of his time are his landscapes, as a rain cloud over the Black Forest or Black Forest Valley, or thunderstorms, and so on. A letter from the German poet Gottfried Benn to the Bremen merchant Oelze in 1940 is typical of this mood of the times. Quote, Doesn't this time today have its own beauty, a Franciscan one? It leads you to the butterflies and the leaves of grass, but the gardens with roses that you have in front of your window guard the dream. Quote, end. The last refuge in these years was a belief in inwardness, turned away from the world as a shelter from the unreasonable demands of an evil world. Inwardness and inner emigration became a position of retreat for German artists and intellectuals. In his resumes after the war, Nerlinger made no mention of his participation in the major art exhibitions in the Munich House of German Art in 1939 and 1940. He also took part in the art exhibition in the district capital Poznan in Poland, which was held in the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in 1940. Nerlinger asked in 1940 the Reich Chamber of Fine Arts for support even of the realization of a large painting on the subject from Westwall to Dunkirk. And quote, he said, but I lack the necessary documents for further elaboration of this painting, the knowledge of the respective landscapes and expert military advice. Some time ago, I read a report in the Völkische Beobachter about a poet's trip to Belgium and France, where the participants could see the most important stages of the struggle in the West on the spot. But I assume that such a trip, in this case a painting trip, can be expected to produce good results through the artistic processing of the experience. And this letter, as proof of his collaboration with the Nazi regime, was to play an important role within the Socialist United Party of Germany after the war. Now I come to the time after the war, come to the end of this lecture. In July 1945, Karl Hofer was appointed director of the newly founded College of Fine Arts in Berlin-Charlottenburg. And he was also, in his far-sighted personal policy, he appointed Oskar Nerlinger as a drawing teacher and associate professor. In the same year, Hofer became a vice president of the Kulturbund alongside Johannes Erbecher, the later Minister of Culture in the GDR, and belonged to the Commission for Fine Arts together with artists like Nerlinger. In a letter to his colleague Gerhard Marx, Hofer reports already in 1946, quote, it's getting worse and more stubborn here. Art should and must and should again. And for the people, the whole Nazi gossip with different omens. Nevertheless, Hofer, together with Nerlinger, accepted to be made the license holder and publisher of the new art magazine Bildende Kunst, which appeared from 1947 to 1949. In this new position, however, and communists in the Soviet licensed magazine, he resolutely defended the autonomy of art and defended himself against its abuse as propaganda. There was a strong resistance within the Communist Party to the transferring of this influential cultural political position to Hofer within the framework of the alliance policy. An employee of the central administration claimed in a memorandum, quote, how is it possible that Professor Hofer, after having put so much effort into him, said, it's all the same whether it's the NSDAP or the SED. Why do you use comrades like that Nerlinger couple repeatedly as a role model, even though it's known of them that they totally failed during the Nazi years? These attacks, of course, went back to this letter he wrote to the Reich Administration of Culture. And yeah, in this letter to the Reich Chamber of Culture, in which Nerlinger asked for a business trip. Fritz Duda and his colleagues from the working group of the visual artists organized in the Communist Party applied in a letter party proceedings against Nerlinger. But the party defended him because He is based on our broad unified politics stance and today works together with the painter Hofer, with the bourgeois painter. That was his kind of alliance. But against this background, it becomes understandable why Nerlinger in the conflict with Hofer, which now will become in this Bild in the Kunst magazine, was absolutely loyal to the party line until the paper was discontinued. After all, he had to prove his loyalty to the party, and the two editors, Nerlinger and Hofer, each embodied the position of the party, Nerlinger, and Hofer, the bourgeois public. During the transformation of this party into a party of new Leninist type in 1948, and the transfer of the Soviet model on GDR, however, the break was inevitable. As early as November 1947, the first serious conflicts between the two editors over the subject of art and politics broke out. Hofer's contribution, rejected by Nerlinger, in which he strictly rejects non-artistic demands on art, can only be published a year later. So now we have the different articles, pro-art and pro-politics by Hofer and Nerlinger. And Nerlinger replies to Hofer, the artist must step out of his seclusion. Not only can he see from a distance over the fence of the life of the people, he has to live and experience this life himself, without reservation or distance. He has to recognize himself as part of the people. He will feel the need to communicate the artistic experience, to communicate it in an understandable way. Finally, Hofer resigned and the paper was discontinued. And in a worsening cultural struggle, intellectuals and artists in the western part of Berlin were now expected to show strict loyalty. As an active member of the Communist Party and a member of the teaching staff at the West Berlin Art College, Oskar Nerlinger is increasingly being targeted by the authorities. And that were the authorities in West Berlin. And as he was giving the price of paintings he sold in East Berlin in an exhibition as a Korean donation from North Korea that was incompatible with the political goals of West Berlin. So that makes the continued employment of this professor intolerable, especially since he gave rise to similar complaints earlier. And the Senator for Cultural Affairs, Tiburtius, he sent him the termination of his job, and the painter left West Berlin in 1951 and went to East Berlin. So that is the last chapter of his life. Oskar and Alice Nerlinger moved to East Berlin in 1951, and they claimed, of course, that there was a promise to get a rent, get a membership of the Academy of Arts and so on. But finally, they got a house with a studio and a professorship at the College of Fine Art, Fine and Applied Art, and also Nerlinger got a commission for a large format painting in Eisenhüttenkombinat in Stalinstadt, which is now called Eisenhüttenstadt, in the GDR. And I can show you some of the sketches he did, the Stalinstadt, Eisenhüttenkombinat, and the work hall, the large lathe factory. And finally, he did a big painting in that way, and he said that he is now on the path to socialist realism, and by a systematic planning and constant exchange of ideas with the working people. Nerlinger is firmly convinced that through his resettlement to the democratic sector of Berlin, he was able to realize the necessity of the closest connection with the progressive working people, that he helped himself out of the artistic impasse. But when you compare his work from the 20s, here, Get to Work in 1930, And I can show you only the draft for the painting, The Taking Possession of the Factories by the Working People in 1956. And also another version is here, Demonstration in 62. You can see how weak the painting became now. That under the conditions of socialism in the GDR, the bridge and chimney are put back into line. The falling lines and bold diagonals of the 1930 version again follow a familiar perspective. The technology no longer looks threatening. The workers are no longer abstract schemes. The metallic colors gave way to warm brown tones, which are interrupted by the dull red of the flags. The perspective is supposed to be the new familiar perspective of the worker as an owner who has taken his fate into his own hands. In the process, however, Nerlinger art derails into a tension-free genre painting in the style of the 19th century. And later in the catalogue of the exhibition Realism and Objectivity, the East Berlin art historian Harald Olbrich, he was taking these optical facts, he was ignoring these optical facts between the two versions. And with a salvatory formula that is one of the permanent achievements of the Nerlingers, along with other artists, the Weimar generation, that they have transformed constructivist experiences into proletarian revolutionary art. Their objective constructivism is reconciled with socialist realism. In doing so, he deliberately blurs the obvious loss of quality between the two paintings from 1930 and 1956. And you can see Nerlinger, at the time he was still working in East Germany. He did landscapes and villages like this, level crossing, which reproduced aesthetic regression in nature and idyll of his inner emigration period in the 1930s. But at the end of his life, however, he allowed himself an ironic, playful excursion into the genre of science fiction with a series of ballpoint pen drawings that he called Cityscapes in the Coming World of Peace and Happiness. And you see here, the bridge city over the sea takes up its typical bridge motif from the 1920s. However, nothing is to be seen of peace and happiness. Rather, these sheets are possibly satirical allusions to the blessings of socialist urban development with its endless buildings, reminiscence of tapeworms. Great Wall City. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Eckhart. This is quite a surprising end to a very long and prolific artistic career. So I now ask everyone, please, to put questions into the Q&A session. We already have actually one question from Kiran M. In building new factories, he asked, the two women's dresses are not factory garb, but rather semi-transparent. Why and how prevalent was this example of sexism in German socialist painting?
Well, I mean, these socialist societies were very patriarchal. And of course, Denica, all his this Russian painter, so not GDR, this Russian painter Denica, of course, was a sexist from our point of view, and of course he is showing the body and the buttocks, and this is it's a time, you know. When you look back, of course, for us, it's, yeah, looks strange.
Yeah, that's quite true. So now David Stern asks, considering the change from constructivism to realism according to Nazi ideology, one would have expected him to change back after the liberation, and he did not. Would you consider this treason to his own artistic position?
Yes, I would say so. He was a communist and he was a believer. It's a secular religion. And the salvation is not in the jenseits, in the outer world. It's in the inner world, salvation and utopia. And in this sense, he believed more in his political goals than in his artistic goals. And of course, he was not defending his constructivism. He was giving way to that in the Nazi time. And after the war, he continued that attitude he took already in the so-called inner emigration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so did he feel like I remember you spoke last year about Lea Grundig quite a while ago, and she also came back. She was also a communist who came back to East Germany, and with all these big hopes of building a perfect society. And does Nerlinger somewhere state some kind of disappointment, or did he feel part in building this new society that he didn't see that this wasn't quite going how many communists were hoping for in their visions?
I think he was very defensive. He was always quarreling that he didn't get the pension and the membership of the Academy of Art. He was not really fighting. The Lea Grundig was different. She was really fighting in 1953 after this upset there in June 53. And she was saying, we are treated very badly. We are wonderful artists and communists from the 20s, and now we are forbidden to do our work as free artists. And she was fighting. She was more fighting, not in the 60s, but in the early 50s. She was fighting because she was in Palestine and in Israel, and she lived in a free democratic country there. She had this experience, which Nerlinger didn't have. He came directly from the Nazi time to the GDR dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Peter Perry says, hi, can you tell us about the change of name from the abstracts to the timelies? Was this about a dissatisfaction with abstraction already in the late 20s?
It was a politicization of the group. As I could show you in this early painting he did here, where the distant artist. I think it was his demonstration he experienced in 1929 on the 1st of May that politicized him. And then he was a communist, of course, and he was following the communist policy against the Weimar Republic. And so they said, we don't want to be called the abstracts. We want not to do abstract work, abstract constructivism, but a political constructivism. It was a change to political constructivism, like in Cologne. The group called themselves political constructivists, this group around Hörle and Seibert and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Which of course put them right on the lists of the Nazis, right?
Yes, sure, yeah.
First thing. And so, but he did not run away or anything. I mean, he was on the lists also of the Nazis, right?
And he was, of course, he was searched his house, and he was in the jail for a couple of days, just to warn him. Yeah, that was the practice at that time, to warn the people and to ask them to be subjects of the Nazis. But he didn't run away. Yeah, he didn't dare to do that. He had no languages. He didn't know where to go, and others left the country, like Beckmann, for example.
Right.
Yeah. wer gründet.
But I mean, we of course we can't, you know, judge anything, because we've been living in a stable Western society our whole lives, really, and what especially the disappearance of visions and ideals, what that does to human being is certainly very, very individual and very personal. But so I, you know, I can imagine many reasons looking at his, you know, biography, many reasons for him to lose steam and lose his energy to push forward. Yeah, but I find it quite impressive how future oriented he was in the 20s and 30s, and then how his political conviction really affects also the quality of his art, right? Not only the themes and the form, but really also the quality in the end, right? Would you agree?
Yes, yes, sure. How he developed from this abstract to the figurative constructivism, yeah, with a spray can. No, but then it was really abrupt. The change in the early 30, yeah, like here. This is in 33. 1 year after the works he did before, and that's really sudden. And he continued in the GDR, the same style. You can see that, especially here or here. It's like in the 30s, yeah. That's the only exception are these 10-point drawings, which he did in 69, just before his death.
Do you think the fact that he was a teacher also influenced the way his art developed?
Not the early work, I think, not the work of the 20s.
No.
But this work, of course, it's near to what you do with pupils, yeah, maybe. This kind of work here.
Yeah.
But I don't think the 20s didn't do that with the pupils, the same style with spray can and with all this.
Right. 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 Yeah, I think actually our time is up, unfortunately, even though I would have many more questions actually. But thank you so much, Eckhart, for sharing with us Nerlinger's life and art. As we're presently living in a time of social, economic, and political changes ourselves, the challenges Nerlinger faced feel very relevant. And in our follow-up email, you will receive a link to the recording of this event. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to see everyone soon again. Be well and stay in touch. Thank you so much, Eckhart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.